and were blown away by how delicious she tasted. While the men enjoyed the meal, they appreciated Luke's gift, which had created such advanced kitchen equipment that helped create a delicious meal. But just then, some villagers ran in and informed Luke that a group of people were approaching the village. They went to check things out at the tower and found out that they were refused, so Berlin recognized a guy he called Donga and soon went to welcome him. Luke asked if he knew the guy, and Berlit shared how he and Donga were long-term friends because Donga liked doing things to Berlit's sister. The guy shared that they were forced to leave their village too because of the war, and he was glad that Berlit had settled in such a place, making him their savior. However, Berlit said Luke was the village head and founder, so Donga was surpassed, but still went on to greet Luke and introduce himself as the leader of their group. Luke said they could discuss more later, but for now, Donga and his people could join the party and feast with them. Some days later, Donga's people were all looking refreshed and robust, while he and Berlit were busy harvesting each other from the back. Luke was glad to see that they'd all made a full recovery, and by then, Donga decided to settle his people in Luke's village because it felt like heaven. They were 44 in number, so the total number of bushes was up to 97. So Luke increased the number of houses in farmland, did a census of their population, and discovered a few more talents among Donga's people. Just then, someone from the watchtower shared that there was a group of possible refugees inside the gates, but this time around, they were about 70 in number. This changed the boy's countenance because that figure seemed overwhelming, unlike when Berlit and his group joined them. Currently, the village already had 97 people, and adding more would be easy, but that meant Luke had to deal with more responsibility, and one wrong move could put everyone's lives in jeopardy. While he was lost in thought, Selin shared that they didn't have enough room to occupy the refugees. The village was already saturated, and it'd be like giving them false hope. So even though Luke possessed a powerful gift, it'd be great if he could limit how many people he welcomed in before the figure became too much. Also, not every refugee group would be as cooperative as the previous two they'd welcomed, so she decided to go speak to the dude, and Berlit and Donga supported the idea. They joined her despite Luke's protests and said it was a job for grown-ups to handle. To reassure him, Milia gently placed her hand on him to reassure him that she was there to support whatever decision he made. She also reprimanded Selin for using a harsh choice of words, and even though Luke understood what Selin was saying, he still couldn't find himself turning his back on anyone. He apologized for what he was about to do and told them to support him in case things went wrong. They all reassured him of their solidarity, and much later, he welcomed the Leon caravan as villagers, adding a total of 76 new members. This boosted Luke to level 4 and gave him 1,000 bonus points, extra village space, and a new skill called Facility Upgrade. Next, he rearranged the buildings and added new row houses and wells, and each time the village leveled up, the land area more than doubled. One of the best features that was added was a church, and he felt there was huge potential in building a church because the people would have blessings bestowed upon them. He decided to build one, and a nice church appeared, which immediately drew Milia's attention. As she walked in, she felt a strong pull towards the church, and when she walked in, there was an even more powerful pull that guided her up to a certain point. This, Luke knew she'd get her blessing in no time because those who had stronger faith were more likely to receive their blessings. She saw this as her opportunity to serve Luke, so she decided to pray all morning and evening. True to her words, Milia didn't stop begging God to make her melons bigger for Luke's sake, so he just left her behind and went to implement some nice upgrades in his storehouse. He also improved the growth speed of crops on his farm, the quality of products, and the time for harvest to increase village space. These changes went on and on, but a few days passed, and Luke remembered that he left Milia praying all by herself in the church, so he started to wonder if she was okay. But when he looked at her, something struck him differently. When she noticed his presence, Milia answered and ran to hug him as she excitedly shared that she'd gotten the oracle gift. Luke was so surprised, so he checked the assessment window and found that it was true, so Milia thanked him for providing the church and helping her get the gift without needing a priest. However, she soon drew him into her bouncy bosom and squeezed the last ounce of purity out of him, while Selin wondered why on earth the gods would choose such a lady to be a priest. Later, Luke gathered everyone around to share that they possessed the potential to receive gifts. One of the men said he was pretty sure gifts were only made for nobles, so a bloody farmer such as himself couldn't receive any. However, Luke said he may be right to say a few families were more opportune to get them, but his village assessment skill showed him otherwise. Even though they struggled to believe his words, Luke told them to step up and receive their gifts, so Barlat did, and Milia blessed him, saying he'd received the gift of swordsmanship. He suddenly experienced a sensation he couldn't understand, and the others watching him decided to confirm if he really received a gift, so they made him a makeshift sword out of wood. But Luke handed him a real sword he felt would be more useful in Barlat's hands, so the guy graciously received it even though he'd never held a sword before. But indeed it felt like he was supposed to. Even though he felt a bit old, he promised to protect the village with everything he had in him. This inspired everyone else to try out, so Luke discovered more gifted folks, including an apothecary, a maze explorer, a wordsmith, a pro farmer, a spearman, a swordsman, a danger sensor, a master sniffer of stinky pits, a shield man, and poison-resistant person. They were all amazed at their individual and collective gifts, and about 17 of them in total were blessed with gifts, 4 of which were younger ones. With that, Luke felt he could now provide his villagers with improved supply and defense. The swordsmen were already sharp at work, even though they'd never used swords before, reflecting the importance of retaining gifts and explaining why Luke's father wanted his sons to receive holy swordsmanship skills. The feisty Selen was their trainer, and she remarked on their improvement, adding that she'd take the swordsmen out hunting with her next time. Luke felt the whole teacher title they gave her was unnecessary because she was practically his mate, but Barlat said Selen had proved to be so powerful. Some other ladies said being a village head was even cooler, and they all started flooding him with love and cuddles you wish you had. As Luke recovered from being used as a teddy, he noted how there were twice as many women as there were men in the village. Most of the young ladies were married, but their husbands were forcefully conscripted into the army, so seeing them smile made Luke really happy, and Barlat came to thank him, especially for making them all happy. Later on from the watchtower, someone reported that there were about 10 more refugees, but they looked so traumatized and terrified. Luke asked for their story, and they shared that they were attacked by a band of thieves, who also got rid of a couple members while taking another group as hostages. Luke felt sympathy for them, but Selen pointed out that these terrified refugees had brought the problem to them. They began crying and apologizing profusely because the thieves were chasing them, so they were certainly on their way to Luke's village. The story switched to a different perspective, specifically that of a member of the gang of thieves named Bar. He was walking dejectedly because he let his guard down a bit and got the boss angry. His main job was to abduct refugees and sell them to slave traders, but due to his carelessness, some of them escaped, so he was tasked with bringing them back by himself. However, he encountered Luke's village and noticed there were mainly women and their offspring, meaning he'd hit the jackpot, and even more so if the villagers were mostly refugees that he could easily take down. Just then, his gang members communicated with him via telepathy, a gift bestowed upon one of the members that allowed them to communicate with each other from any distance. He told them that many lives were going to be ruined in a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, Luke got a sudden hunch that something was not right, so he told Selen and was coincidentally alerted by the hologram that there was an intruder. Selen suspected that it could be the gang of thieves from earlier and was glad for Luke's system because it could save them from trouble. Anyway, the system message said there was just one intruder, so it means the person was scouting the village and had been located in the field. Selen was on standby along with the other combative voyagers, hiding in strategic places, but they noticed that the intruder was moving in silence, so Selen told Luke to stand back in case the intruder jumped out of nowhere. Luke checked his system map and pointed out where their intruder was hiding. Bar was very upset that he'd been caught, but when he found that it was just two dumb Gen Alphas who would be pretty easy to deal with. He dragged his sword and was ready to attack, but he was frozen in a big block of ice, which was something he didn't see coming. His gang members tried reaching out to him, but he couldn't respond, and just when Bar was locked in a cell, his members said they were heading to the village. When he regained consciousness, Selen went to check on him, but he was just finding it hard to understand how the heck he was in that cell in the first place. She asked him how many more of the gang members there were, but Bar wasn't ready to be a snitch at any point. His members asked him to answer if he could gear, and Bar eventually communicated back telepathically, saying they could certainly get in the village because there weren't many men to deal with. He said this in the hopes that the gang boss would show up and fix everything. But suddenly, one ancient baddie showed up and said she'd take care of the intruder. Luke was confused at first, but then he remembered that this granny had a PhD in tormenting people, and so when asked them to open the prison door for her, they let her in and only warned her not to get too close to him. Out of the blue, Granny asked Bar if he had a mother, and that he should imagine his mother's face and think of all the pain she went through to bring his sorry buns to the world. He felt she was only doing this to make him cry, so he burst into a mock cry, saying he won't be bad anymore and they should let him go. Granny looked like she was buying out, but Selen told her not to be fooled because everything was just an act. But suddenly the dude was suspended in the air and Grandma was squeezing the milk out of his baby Jules until he was completely out of his senses when she started telling him to imagine just how sad his mom would look after she was done dealing with him. This sent chills down Luke's spine, so she told both of them to get ready for battle, while she tried to force him to talk. At the same time, Bar's gang members had just arrived at the village he directed them to. The telepathy guy said there was something off about Bar's replies because the conversations kept breaking, but the other guy felt he was just slacking as usual. Anyway, they decided to listen in on the village before raiding it, but their boss told them to shut up because all they needed were balls of steel to make the villagers squirt blood. He spotted the tiny gate and said they couldn't be stopped just because of the gate, so he swung his axe and broke the gate, after which he commanded his men to follow him. But instantly, Luke felt their presence approaching from the darkness, and the system pointed him to their location. On the other hand, the gangsters were worried that no one was screaming even though they'd broken in, but they weren't aware that Luke was about to create a water moat right under them. Suddenly, the ground beneath them gave way and the guys fell right into a body of water, and before they knew it, they were getting covered in ice from the bottom up. Selen was glad their plan worked and the bandits fell for their trap, while the other villagers who were in on it joined her to celebrate. They left, but the bandit leader suddenly spoke up from behind her, pointing out that she was the one who froze the water. She quickly spun and hit the man on his head, but it only made a clanging sound against his head. Luke was worried for Selen, who realized that the man was pretty strong since he was able to get himself out of the ice. The leader tried to attack her, but she dodged it and backflipped, but managed to land a cut on his sides. Watching this, the villagers noticed that the man was an equal match for Selin. But even worse, he noticed that the ice was melting because Selin was unable to focus on her magic. He ordered them to round the bandits up in good time, but surprisingly, one of them reached out to his limbs, and it was already too late. As the attackers plunged towards Luke, he knew it was already his last day on Earth. But a hand suddenly snatched him from impending death, belonging to none other than Barlat. But right before he could finish thanking him, he saw Barlat trying to use his sword with better aim than how you position your pee-pee in the toilet bowl. Luke was dizzy as heck, but he was back to his senses the moment he saw the combat villagers frozen in place. The thugs also noticed this, and found that they didn't know how to use the weapons in their hands, so they proceeded to attack regardless, while Luke watched as his villagers were about to be wiped out, and they weren't even helping matters. One of them had to step in, so he called his frozen members to order, saying they should do exactly as they practiced on the training grounds. But they said they'd never fought this many opponents at once, so it was exactly what the opening needed to hear as they watched them getting hysterical. He thought victory was only inches away from him, but got kicked in the face, thanks to Luke being a weapon of destruction. He also instructed his villages to push those idiots back into the mood, and the other villages noticed that the thugs were actually still frozen, and their movements were pretty slow, meaning they could defeat them. With renewed courage, they began beating the life out of those fools, as they found out that they were just weak guys with fat mouths. Each villager individually had to give themselves some pep talk to remind themselves of how much they had been through, and that all they needed to do was focus. This resulted in them successfully getting lots of the thugs back into the moat, and the telepathy guy couldn't believe his eyes because those weak, miserable-looking novices were suddenly stronger than they could comprehend. Right before his own eyes, the boss fell into the moat and was in a completely frozen state, so they knew it was all over for them. This was all thanks to Selin's slick tactic because she had been taking out of his body heat with every single cut. She landed on him so he didn't notice that he was getting frozen little by little. At the end of the day, the villages won, and the system notified that 40 intruders were captured. The next day, the villagers rescued the other hostages who had been captured by the thieves, reuniting them with their loved ones. This was a team effort, but mostly Jeffrey Dahmer's mom, with her extreme torturing techniques, was able to successfully extract information from them. Right now, the only issue was they didn't know exactly how to deal with those captured bandits. Even worse, if Luke accidentally got captured by the prisoners, he'd be rammed so hard that he'd have to wear diapers for life. Normally, he would have turned them in to the nearest police station, but with the recent battles going on, no one would accept them, so he was essentially stuck with them. The dumb system suggested that he turn them into villagers, but there was no way on Earth he was going to do that. However, suddenly, it occurred to him that there was an option for a rehabilitation center, and he could try to reform some of them in the rehab. It also occurred to him that the title of the villager didn't particularly mean that they had to get equal treatment with the rest of the villagers. Moreover, if they became inhabitants, it meant he could use his villager assessment skill to determine their loyalty and know just how well the rehabilitation was working on them. He decided to get advice from the other villagers, but some of them who were badly traumatized were even disappointed that he wasn't kissing the bandits' skulls with bullets. Some felt getting rid of all the bandits was the safest option, but some others considered that not all the bandits were involved in murdering victims and might have been coerced to join them. In the end, Burlet and Duggan agreed that there could be future crimes, and so the best option was to see what the rehab center would do. However, one of the traumatized victims whose family was murdered by the bandits wasn't happy with this decision, and so she and a few others left the village. Luke felt bad for them, but Granny said they disagreed with the village direction, and there was no helping that. She also told Luke that one day the villagers would forget everything he did for them, and go berserk as expected of humans. But that was exactly why this ghetto grandma existed, to torture rotten rascals until they were made right. With that, Luke created the rehab center, and since he didn't know how effective the center would be, he decided to try placing 5 remorseful-looking prisoners first. Seeing the young men made Granny Nema excited because it had been centuries since she last got laid. Luke hoped the center would actually solve the problem with the thieves, but when they started looking at him with puppy dog eyes, he was almost deceived, thinking that they had changed their ways already. Luckily, he checked the village loyalty points for them and found that they were miles away from being loyal, so he permitted Granny Nema to take them and use them as she seemed fit. Next, he took it upon himself to fix the gate that was damaged by the bandit and upgrade it for improved security. When he was done, he explored this to see what new features were available, knowing that he had agreed to level 5, and then he found out that he could remodel facilities into new shapes and change their colors. This made him look at the grand architecture of his village, but even that was enough to make him smile because he was proud of his achievements. After thinking for a while about what to build next, he finally decided to create a public bath. The villages were completely lost, so he had to explain that they could all use the public bath to shower, but there were dedicated sections for men and women. One lady was asking dumb questions, so he said if she needed specific instructions on how to bathe there, he could give her up close and personal tutorials in the bathroom. He showed the ladies the dressing room and wasted no time in flinging their clothes and revealing those French curves. He went to check in on the men who invited him to join them and take a dip so they could dip into his rear pit. Seeing everyone really having fun made him so happy, but his smile slowly disappeared when he heard that they were doing absolute nasty stuff right behind him. Much later, Sel and others were into rigorous training, but she kept breaking the swords and making them feel like the weak irredeemable simps they were. But this made them realize that they didn't have actual weapons, and this was making them hold back. Unfortunately, in a real battle, there would be no holding back, just as it was in the battle against the bandit where the villagers' shields were broken easily. They planned to go further on exploration to get better training items and realized that in the absence of real weapons, they couldn't explore the forest safely. So he checked to see if he could get some weapons from his system. But all he saw were facilities, and when Barlat saw just how concerned he looked, he told Luke not to worry and try using his gift, mostly for himself, because they were way too dependent on him. It was at that moment he found his true love. One of the guys said it was true because Luke was busy being more than living in a lame farmer's shed. But instead of upgrading his house, he chose to build a bath for them first. The dude felt it was inconveniencing that Luke, Milia, and Selen had to share a bed, but he didn't know Luke was really enjoying poking multiple holes at a time. And the other creepy dudes caught on to that quickly, realizing that Luke was the direct opposite of innocent. To shut the loud mouths up, Luke quickly upgraded his house to a medium-sized one, while Selen and Milia made the goats regret letting their fat mouths leak. After creating his house, Luke ushered the ladies in, gladly saying they now had 3 rooms. But Milia wasn't pleased that one of the rooms had a bigger bed than the other 2, so he apologized that it was an upgrade fault, and she said he could have the bed as the village head that he was. The twist was that she'd share the bed with him because she couldn't get used to sleeping on any other bed, but this wasn't so exciting to Selen, and she protested the unfairness. To calm the situation, Luke said they could both share the bed because he could manage a really tiny bed. This was the worst news for both girls, and they both mourned having to spend a second with each other. But he ignored them and went on to customize the wall, transforming it into a stone wall. He also added some stairs behind it, about 8 sets of them. Next, he created holes in the wall from which the villagers could attack intruders. But when he inspected what he'd created, it was far deeper than he thought it'd be, meaning they might have to use spears. To his dismay, he saw Donga's fat, scary-looking face from the top of the wall, and the man asked him what the space was supposed to be used for. Luke said they could use the windows to strike back if they were ever under attack, but he wasn't sure which weapon would be suitable for such a space. But Dogan had a hand fetish, so he started rubbing Luke's hands from the hole and sharing his boring sand castle stories from his childhood. This made Luke realize that the space was too accessible from the outside, so he started thinking deeply about how to make the villagers more capable of defending themselves with weapons. Unfortunately, their village was in the middle of nowhere, and even if they searched for small villages nearby, Luke wasn't sure they'd be able to help his village with the required weapons. But an idea suddenly occurred to him, and he realized that if he used his facility customization skill, he could alter a part of the wall. With that, he pulled out a log of wood and carved a sword out of it. Then he added a couple of touches here and there, making it a lot better. However, that sword had no handle and the system wasn't letting him customize it anymore. So he figured that it was so because the sword was detached from the log of wood in the wall. The next time he tried carving a sword, he left it attached at the base of the wood and the system let him customize it this time around, so he created a handle. He was really proud of his handwork, which only cost about 3 points, so he proceeded to make a bunch of them, but right then, his rubber sword snapped and he realized just how fragile it was. His dumb, rusty brain accepted that wood wasn't the best material to create a sword out of, but he wasn't quite sure where he could get a sturdier material for the sword. It was at that moment it occurred to him that he'd completely forgotten about the prison, which consisted of metallic bars. But when he got in, those dudes just wanted a taste of his innocent meat. He was sort of terrified making it in front of them, but since he noticed that the bars were super sturdy, he decided to create a weapon out of them. He ignored those yapping fools and continued with his work. So he started by creating an extra bar among the rails, and then he began customizing the bar, much to the awe of the noisy prisoners. When he finished, he was pleased with the products and decided to seek the advice of those who'd know about weapons. He first showed it to Selen and Barlat, who were surprised that he made an iron sword, and even more surprised that it was his village building skill that allowed him that opportunity. She quickly threw a sword to Barlat, and they sparred for a while, after which she satisfactorily concluded that the swords were perfect. Excitedly, she ran to tell the others that Luke had created weapons for them, while Grandma Nema paid Luke a visit, looking like she was ready to join the ancestors. But right behind she pointed to the newly reformed thugs, who now looked like they dropped straight from the heavens. Luke was still super scared that these guys could surprise him with a punch to the face, so he checked the system to assess their village loyalty, and much to his surprise, they had a high village loyalty score. Next, Grandma commanded the boys to obey Luke, who's the village chief, and they should get ready to swallow his pipe or die if he commands them to. They immediately bowed and pledged their allegiance to him, telling him to order them as soon as he wished. Luke asked Granny what she did to transform them into such loyal beings, but she said the facility made them docile as soon as they were put in, so she didn't even have the opportunity to drill holes through them as she would have wanted. As she turned to leave, she asked him to send more difficult men next time, but now was stuck with these obsessed boys. He was in a confused state because he didn't know what to do with them given that they were highly loyal, and the granny attested to their changing attitude. This didn't stop him from suspecting whether they were safe the moment he saw Barlat's sword training. He told him to all go and help him out. Granny kept rehabilitating the thieves, and all her reformed boys were tracked by other villagers for a while and seen to remain in good character. Later, Luke visited jail with Grandma, who was up to his usual antics. But he suddenly heard a voice and turned to look around, but he saw no one. It wasn't